Good in the back? Cool. All right, hey everyone, my name is Noah. I'm an iOS engineer at PlanGrid in the US. It's my first time in India and it's been amazing so far. And today I'm going to talk about how you can turn your iPad app into a Mac app using Mac Catalyst. So first of all, what is Catalyst? Well, it's a new environment introduced by Apple at WWDC 2019, only a few months ago. And basically what it allows you to do is take a UIKit code base and compile it and run it in a AppKit runtime environment as a Mac app. So that's kind of a lot of big words. What does it actually mean? Well, if you're like me and you're just an iOS developer who mostly works on iOS apps and has never touched a Mac app, you're probably familiar with UIKit, the system-provided framework in iOS that provides us as developers with UI components to build our apps. There also exists for Mac apps a system for the same purpose called AppKit. And though UIKit and AppKit might look very similar at the surface, they both have views, windows, view controller classes, etc. Underneath the hood, they're actually very different, both in the way that they function from an infrastructure perspective and the components that they provide to us as developers to build our UIs. They're actually so different, in fact, that it can be a real pain to try to maintain two versions of an app, one in UIKit for iOS and one in AppKit for Mac. So what Catalyst does is it bridges the gap, and it allows your UIKit code base to compile and run as an AppKit app. So one thing before I go forward, there's a lot of different names for Catalyst that people use in different places. iPad apps for Mac, UIKit for Mac, Catalyst, they all are talking about the same thing. If you hear people talking about Marzipan, this is what it used to be called before it was officially released. So these are all talking about Catalyst. So the reason why I got started thinking about Catalyst earlier this year was through my work at PlanGrid. So PlanGrid is a construction productivity app. And what that means is if you're building a building, at least in the US, you're generally working on these set of blueprints, which are these sort of technical line drawings that tell you where to put components as part of the building so that you can construct it in the right way. And PlanGrid has a suite of products to basically allow you to manage and distribute these blueprints across all platforms. So we have an iOS app, an Android app, a web app, and interestingly, we have a Windows app which works natively on tablets and on Windows desktops. So when Catalyst came out, I kind of thought it might be interesting to see if we could use it to port our existing iPad app to Mac so that our users could work with their blueprints on Mac as well. And at the same time, I maintain an app called cifilter.io, which is an iPhone app which allows you to take a camera image and apply any core image transform to it. So I actually wanted to port this to Catalyst as well because it would be really great for users to be able to select an image from their desktop or download it off the internet, etc. As well. So I've been thinking about Catalyst for the past few months from multiple angles, and hopefully I can provide you with some guidance in this talk about how to do it the most effective way if you want to port your app to Catalyst as well. So one thing before we go forward, all of this is beta software. The new GMs of Xcode aren't out yet at the time of this talk. If you're watching the recording in the future, the current beta is beta 4, so you'll see some code examples in this talk which might just not work in the future or might change, or you'll see some things which aren't finalized. But I do have a repo called Catalyst Playground which has working code for a bunch of these examples which I'll go through, so feel free to clone that, look around if you want to play with actual working code. So the agenda for this talk will go beyond the checkbox, which is the first step towards writing a Catalyst app. We'll talk about how to implement some common map patterns with UIKit. We'll talk about we'll talk about AppKit bundles and do a quick demo. Live coding is always fun, and then hopefully with that knowledge, we'll come back and discuss whether we should actually use Catalyst for your use case. So beyond the checkbox, if you watch any of the WWDC slides about Catalyst, a lot of what they say is, all you have to do in order to run your iPad app on Mac is check a box. This box in the Xcode settings which says Mac. hopefully you check that box, compile the app, and everything works great. And that's probably how it's going to work if you have a pretty small app with not a lot of external dependencies. But with a bigger app like PlanGrid, there are a few things which might break. So UI WebView and a bunch of other technologies which are deprecated in iOS are just not available in Catalyst. So if you're using UI WebView in your app, or you're consuming a library like RxCocoa, which wraps UI WebView, that will just fail to compile. So that's something that you might have to deal with. There's some frameworks like Core Telephony, which aren't available on Catalyst. Macs don't have the carrier information, of course, so Core Telephony is used by a lot of third-party analytics libraries, so you might run into issues with that if you're using analytics libraries. If you use cross-platform static libraries in your app, like .a's, generally you probably won't be compiling them for x86, which means you might run into link errors. And then you also don't have access to things that don't make sense on Mac, like ARKit, for example. So the question is, if you don't have access to some of these things, how do you maintain one code base and sort of conditionally compile everything? The answer is you can use a Swift directive called target environment and pass in Mac Catalyst, and everything inside these if and if will only get compiled when you're compiling for Catalyst. You do have to be careful though. There's some other directives which can be a little bit tricky. You generally don't want to use can import UIKit. Some people have suggested this, but UIKit on Catalyst is actually different than UIKit on iOS. So this code will cause a link error if you try to run it on Catalyst. Also, there are Swift directives for operating system. You have to be careful about this because Catalyst actually, as of the current beta, for Swift directive purposes, is an iOS operating system. So in this code example, iOS will get printed, so be careful about that. So if your dependencies break your app, you'll have to submit pull requests if they're open source, or request support tickets if they're a vendor framework. What you should do is request redistribution of the static libraries if there are any in an XC framework format, since this is Apple's new format that allows you to package static libraries for Mac and iOS in the same format. Okay, so let's talk about a few Mac patterns and how to implement them in UIKit. So again, we have a Catalyst Playground repo which demonstrates a bunch of these. You can clone and play around with it if you want. And then one thing to note is that you will have to import AppKit for a few of these. So you'll find yourself writing if target environment Mac Catalyst import AppKit for a bunch of these code examples. So the first thing to talk about is Windows. So it's a staple of Mac apps to support multiple windows with different content. Luckily, on iOS 13, there's a new API called UI Scene Session that supports multiple windows on iPad as well, and this actually works exactly in the same way for Catalyst. So you can create UI Scene Sessions using request scene session activation. I won't go into too much of the detail on the UI Scene Session API, so it really deserves a talk of its own, but you can request scene session activation, and then you can request scene session destruction to open and close the windows, respectively. There are a few caveats that you'll have to watch out for on Catalyst with regard to Windows. New Windows, when you launch them, always assume a system-assigned size and position. So if you want to do something like create a new window that is 200 by 200 points and at a certain position on screen, that's just not going to be possible in a Catalyst app, at least as of Beta 4. So when the user drags or resizes a window, your auto layout constraints will get updated. Hopefully, if you set up your constraint systems correctly, this means your content scales to fill the whole window, but definitely a good thing to check if you're looking for bugs. And then, yeah, there's no way to update the size or position of the window with code. The only way for the window to get updated is for the user to drag it. So that's just another limitation. All right, so app menus are a thing in Mac apps. Each app generally has a menu bar which has a bunch of buttons to take action in the app. So in UIKit, you can use UI Menu Builder, which is a new API as of iOS 13, in order to do this. And how you do it is on your app delegate, you override a function called build menu, and you can use the provided menu builder to insert a child instance of UI menu. One thing to note here is that the UI menu initializer is prefixed with a double underscore. So this code works right now, but probably it will change by the time that the GMs come out. So take that into account. And you can provide children to your UI menu. If you want to use a button that is triggerable by a keyboard shortcut, you can use a UIKit command. This is actually already available in iOS 12 and later for external keyboards on iPad. But this will get inserted into your menu. And then if you need a command without a keyboard shortcut, you can use the regular UI command. This API probably will change as well. It has a double underscore, but works right now as a beta 4. Another thing to note is Catalyst automatically provides a menu based on your app's configuration. So for example, if you support multiple windows in your app, which if you're writing a Catalyst app, you probably should, Catalyst will automatically fill in these new and closed menu items. They won't be there if your app doesn't support multiple windows. So that's a good thing to watch out for. Touchbar is another Mac-only API. Implementing it in UIKit is actually very easy. You just conform your view controller to NS Touchbar provider. It has a variable called touchbar. You can create a touchbar, set its template items, and return the touchbar, and it will actually just work. The most common touchbar item that you're probably going to use is an NS button touchbar item, which just has a title and has an action that will be called, a selector that will be called when the user taps on the button. All the other system default touchbar items are available. Like you can have color pickers, sliders, etc. The only one that's not available is NS custom touchbar item. So you can't have a custom UI view in a touchbar item at this time. That's another limitation of Catalyst. All right, so toolbar is another thing that generally in Mac apps you have in every window a toolbar at the top of your view which has buttons which affect sort of root actions in that window. Toolbar implementation in UIKit is a little bit complicated. You have a UI window scene which represents your window. That window scene has a title bar which you can give a toolbar to. So it's a little bit of a roundabout way, but this is how you initialize a toolbar and pass it to your window scene. You can initialize toolbar items with a UI bar button item. So basically toolbar items can function the exact same way as tab bar, or sorry, not tab bar, navigation bar button items in iOS. There are no custom views for the toolbar supported in Catalyst right now. You can only use UI bar button item, pretty much. And just one random thing, you have to import this UIKit, NS toolbar plus UIKit additions header in your Objective-C or in your Swift bridging header in order to get the UI title bar to work. Hopefully that will be fixed in a later beta. So this is what it looks like. You get your title bar, you make a toolbar, you set the title bar's toolbar. Pretty easy. And then your toolbar delegate has to declare identifiers. So here we're declaring two identifiers with flexible space in between them, and these identifiers will need to be returned from this toolbar default item identifiers and allowed item identifiers functions. And then the last delegate method that you have to implement is toolbar item for item identifier. And basically what this does is you just switch on the item identifier, create your toolbar item. This is where you pass in a UI bar button item, etc. So there are a couple other AppKit components that work pretty much the same way as their counterparts on iOS. Drag and drop work exactly the same way. You add a UI drag interaction or UI drop interaction to your views. There are some issues with Catalyst on Xcode Beta 4 where drops just don't work. So if you're trying to implement drag and drop on Catalyst and it doesn't work, this is why. So context menus work the same way. You add a UI context menu interaction to your view, and if you want to allow your user to choose a file from the file system, you just present a UI document picker view controller, and this automatically maps to the NS open panel panel to select the file on Catalyst. All right, so this kind of begs the question, like, how much of AppKit is actually available to me in a Catalyst app? Like, we've been importing AppKit. Like, what does that actually give me? Well, it's actually pretty much just NS Touchbar and NS Toolbar. You don't really have direct access to an NS window. You can't move the window around. You don't have complicated views like NS Table View. But there is a way, it's a little bit hacky, but I'll talk about it, to dig a little bit deeper into the AppKit internals while running a Catalyst app. And that's by using an AppKit bundle. So what is an AppKit bundle? It's kind of an intended feature of AppKit where you can have third-party code loaded in as an executable bundle. You import it using NSBundle, and these plugin bundles have full access to the AppKit runtime. They know about NS windows, they can move them around, etc. They can present panels, do pretty much everything you can do in AppKit. They can communicate with your regular UIKit code, either via an Objective-C interface, or you can just do Notification Center, which we'll see in a second. The one thing you can't do is mix UIKit and AppKit view hierarchies. This might technically be possible with some hacks. This is the kind of thing that is bound to break at any time, so I definitely wouldn't recommend trying to mix these view hierarchies. So we have a live demo. There's a GitHub repo if you want to check this out, but we're going to do a little bit of a demo of how to implement some deeper AppKit concepts in a Catalyst app using AppKit bundles. So we'll go over to Xcode. Is the text big enough? Can you all read it? Yeah? Maybe I'll make it bigger just in case. So we have a simple Catalyst app here right now. It just has one view controller and it has one button. This button doesn't do anything right now except print a message, but what we want to make it do is a common thing in AppKit, which is move the window to the right side of the screen, called tile window right. So what we have to do in order to do this is we have our iOS app running on the Mac here. What we want to do is go to File, New, Target, and we're going to create a new AppKit bundle. So we go to macOS and down to Bundle. We're going to call this AppKit Bundle. And then what we get from the AppKit bundle is just an info plist. I'm sorry, this is kind of hard to see. Xcode doesn't actually allow you to make it bigger. But what we want to do is look for the principal class key. And we're going to put in a class name, which we're going to write in a second. We'll just call it AppKit Principal. So now we're going to create that new file. We can just make it a Swift file. That'd be called AppKit Principal. We will need to create a bridging header for this, that's fine. And I'm going to paste in some code here. Basically, all our principal class is just an NS object. It has a function called tile window right, and this is actually where it reaches into the AppKit runtime, finds a screen, calculates the right half of the screen, then it calls nsapplication.shared.windows.first.setFrame, and that is what's actually going to cause the window to animate to the right side of the screen. All right, so we have our AppKit principal. Now what we have to do is go back over to our Catalyst app and write a loader for it. So I'm going to create a new file. It's going to be an Objective-C file. I know this is a Swift conference, but hopefully people don't riot when I create an Objective-C file. We'll call it AppKit loader. You can do this in Swift as well. It's just a little bit easier for demo purposes in Objective-C. Yep, we'll put it in here. We will have to create a bridging header. And our AppKit loader is just going to have one method called load bundle, and it will return an instance of our AppKit principal class as an ID. The implementation looks like this. We just grab our principal class from the bundle, allocate it, and initialize it, and return it. And then, in order to access this in our AppKit app, we have to create a variable for the AppKit principal, and then when we did finish launching with options, we grab the plugin path, bundle.main.builtin plugins path, we append the name AppKit bundle that we just named our bundle. We create a bundle, we make a loader, and we set the AppKit principal to loader.load. And we're seeing unresolved identifier AppKit loader. That's because we have to add this to our bridging header. Import AppKit loader.h, and then hopefully this should compile and run. Nice, but we're getting a fatal error because we actually have to do a little bit more infrastructure to set up our AppKit bundle. So what we're going to do is go to our regular Catalyst target. We're going to need to add a dependency for our new target, and then we do have to add a copy files phase. And we're going to put it in the plugins path, and then we'll find our compiled AppKit bundle and add it like that. All right, so hopefully this compiles and runs now. And we have our window, but the window still doesn't do anything. It just prints a message. So in our AppKit principal class, we added an observer on the notification center for this notification named tile window right. So we actually need to send this notification in our view controller. So it's just notification center default.post, and then hopefully this will work. I haven't actually tried it with the smaller screen scale, so nice. All right, so we got our window tiling right. So that's just an example of how you can sort of use AppKit bundles to reach into the AppKit internals in your Catalyst app, where you wouldn't really have access to that stuff with UIKit. All right, so now we have one more question to answer based on all the stuff that we've seen in this talk. Should I actually use Catalyst? Well, if you have a new macOS app that you're writing without an AppKit or without an iPad equivalent, probably you shouldn't use Catalyst. You should consider using regular AppKit. AppKit is more accessible than ever with SwiftUI nowadays, so definitely consider writing an AppKit app. If you have a new cross-platform app that you want to write, you could use Catalyst, but definitely consider using SwiftUI as well. Because same thing, you're using an experimental new framework, but you can share SwiftUI views across multiple targets. So it's easier to maintain both the UIKit and AppKit app. If you're like me and you just don't want to learn AppKit, you don't want to put in the time, and you just want to use Catalyst instead, all you have to do is, you shouldn't do this. AppKit is more approachable than ever. Instead of writing a Catalyst app, just write an AppKit app. But if you have a significant existing UIKit code base with a pretty small number of external dependencies or those which you're willing to work with and resolve issues for them, and you don't have a super lot of need for this macOS specific UI like controlling windows, and you're okay with using an experimental framework, a new framework, then Catalyst is probably a good idea for you. And if you do start writing a Catalyst app, just definitely get in touch on Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. There's a little small community around Catalyst apps right now. Further reading, a few good WWDC talks about Catalyst. I put in here the multiple windows on iPad talk as well. There's a great community-made guide called Ultimate Catalyst Guide, which has a bunch of examples of how to do a bunch of stuff with code for Catalyst. And there's also a great article called Beyond the Checkbox, which goes into more of how to use AppKit bundles for your Catalyst app. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the conference.